Hey everyone, and welcome to our next panel that is called Spirit of Resilience, Living and Creating Under Occupation. The truth is that almost all of the modern Ukrainian history, Ukrainians have been living and creating under the occupation, more or less rough. And art has been always used as a form of resilience. But today we'll explore more about culture helps to lift the spirit of resilience during those times. Welcome our panelists, the moderator Andreas Norman, panelists Olga Mukha, Olena Yurchenko, Hanna Gerdes, and Hamlet Zinkivskyi.
So, thank you for coming, ladies and gentlemen. It's lovely to see you, and welcome to our distinguished guests and our panel. I will give them just a brief, more detailed presentation, if you allow me. First of all, my name is Andreas Norman. I'm a former diplomat. I'm right now the head of communication at the Swedish NGO Östgruppen. And I'm a writer and screenwriter. Gamlet Zinkivskyi is well known to most of you, I think, one of the most well-known artists, a beloved street artist from Kharkiv. Olga Mukha, PhD, who is a specialist in cultural heritage and have a lot of projects in museum and art and culture, who will talk more on non-violent resistance on this panel. Hanna Gerdes, expert in international law and human rights law, and also chairperson of the board of the Swedish NGO Civil Rights Defenders. And then we have Olena Yurchenko, journalist, resident now in Sweden, who is an expert on occupied Crimea, have worked in the occupied Crimea, and will tell us more about that. You have been an editor and journalist for Radio Liberty. And then we have our interpreter. Thank you for joining us as well. So, starting out, we will talk about how art and culture in general can be a movement for defiance and resistance in various aspects. So I would like to start with you, Olga. You're a curator of several art projects and a driving force behind several projects in the crossroad of supporting those affected by war and art and research. One of your projects is so-called Unseen Force. What is the unseen force, and what could you describe the general approach of this project?
Yeah, I will ask to let's start with a gray video. We have our internal, gray and yellow videos.
Це Україна! Слава Україні! Героям слава!
charge of those documentary shooting which are proofs of how civilians on the occupied territories are perceiving the Russian occupation. And this is a documentary, it started as a documentary project. The topic of violence and sensitive projects is nothing new for me. I started in 2003. So it's ages ago, when we, with the Polish sociologist Irena Borowik, we were gathering interviews from those who just got back from their deportation to Kazakhstan. And those were testimonies of Crimean Tatars, which were born or which they were raised, and only in 90s they got their permission to get back and to have their homes back. And one of the biggest shaking after 2014 was for me when I met one of those families in Lviv. They lost their home for the second time. Yeah, they had to move to Western Ukraine with the whole family and rebuild their life and their homes again. Afterwards, as a part of Territory of Terror, we started another documentary project, which is called Wounded Culture. We're documenting all those damages to Ukrainian museums and cultural institutions, mostly gathering testimonies, also VR shootings of the destroyed museums. So you can literally walk through Museum of Ahtyrka, Museum of Trostianets. Now we also recorded and featured a few weeks ago the testimonies from Museum of Odessa, Fine Art Museum, which been also aimed. And you've seen probably, and you can only recognize the yellow ribbon symbol. Those guys, they appeared in Donbass region back after 2014. And that was an incredible story for me, because when I was thinking who started the movement, I could never guess. And I bet you will not do it as well. Because those were football fans. Those guys who had in their homes all those national symbols, which remembered the golden age of Donetsk and on the Evron 2012, and when the city was self-developed, one of the biggest, one of the most rich. And finally, them started those campaigns and initiation. And when I started to dig deeper on nonviolent resistance, I found out that there are way more. I learned about Angry Matka movement, about those girls which also initiated their movement in Melitopol, starting from 3 girls. And I was absolutely surprised how little do we know about that. That was one of the things why I called the project Unseen Force, because it's been undercovered, and also we do not know about them, and people mostly don't know. But the main trigger was on ICOM meeting in 2023, when one of the Italian curators, she was very empathetic, she was very supporting for Ukraine, and she asked me a very weird question. She asked, can you just explain me in simple words, what is your guys' problem with the occupation? You can just change flags and basically pay taxes to different countries, that's it. Right? Especially on paying taxes, I was kind of internally astonished. And I stood back for a while and thought, okay, when was the last time when Italy suffered from the occupation with the element of genocide? Let me think. Probably never. Or a very short period during the Second World War, and that was kind of weird, right? They basically were on the other side as a country which colonized, not being others, but not being colonized themselves. So I thought it through, and I thought that probably the best approach to tell through that Ukraine is not just about territories. Even on a level of legal terms, we always talking about occupied territories. We always tend to add temporarily occupied territories because we put a hope on it, right? It's temporary state. But then I thought, what's about people? And that was the main puzzles which pushed me to compile this exhibition, which is quite big. It's 12 different sections, starting from documentary and until the artistic reflections, and those artists which are now under occupation, which are from the deoccupied territories, or which were creating something in occupation. But those are very diverse experiences, and I believe we're going to refer to it later on.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, it's great work. And it's available, I just want to mention, very much on internet. You can Google it, of course, and there's great videos and also websites with all kinds of material if you want to look into it deeply. Gamlet, the human perspective, you are very much sort of trying, I feel, expressing it in your work. As a resident of Kharkiv, as a human being, what is art for you now in times of war?
Art for me, it's tried to find answers for a lot of questions what we have, because war gives a lot of questions which you never use in normal life without war. It's like a death. Our friend Nika Kajushka, it was in the summer, last summer in Kharkiv. It's very young, very talented person. She make a lot of draw. She write poems, etc. And 80 years old, and she died. And she was very good friend of me and Sergei Zhedan, and we organized a fund for people, for talented young people in Kharkiv, in Ukraine, and we collect money to help to young generation. It's a Nika Foundation. It's one of them, because we couldn't turn back Nika. She died. But we can help to new generation, do something new. And for me, it's very important to do something to give soldiers a hope. Because one part when I do something in Kharkiv on the street in 2022, and it's totally empty city with soldiers and volunteers and civilian people, a lot of them move somewhere on another region of Ukraine or in Europe, and a lot of them follow Instagram or read the news and call me and told, we are waiting a moment when we turn back to Kharkiv and just walk around and meet your works. It gives us the hope. And different way when I moved to Izum or in Kupiansk and Liman and do something especially for soldiers, to give them this message. You are not alone. We are artists, we are with you. And of course you understand how important new art for soldiers when they told you, look, we heard a new sound of Sergei Zhedan, and we go on a zero line with this music, new song, and it's very interesting. And it's give me a hope that art is really important for in this situation. And of course, for me, art it's just collection, a huge money for help to army. It's my main part probably, because I make 1 million hryvnias with my works just for buy cars, drones, etc.
I heard a story, I don't know if it's true, but in the beginning of the full-scale invasion, your commander ordered you to continue do street art.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, and it was like, are you seriously? We have a rocket attack, Russian artillery stay near the Kharkiv, few kilometers from land Kharkiv, and shooting in the city. And he say, yeah, you have to do a street art. Okay. And now I understand how yeah. And now I understand how important it was.
If I may, just add a short comment, because when I was researching on nonviolent and artistic resistance topic, we asked the spokesperson of National Resistance Center, how does it help? And he probably gave a very clear understanding. He said, look, when Russian soldiers walking down the Mariupol or Melitopol streets, and he's seen in the Telegram channels that they burning cars, they are attacking someone being exploded, and they seen the Ukrainian poems right on the wall, they seen yellow ribbon, they seen Ukrainian state symbols, they know that even civilians are pushing you back, that this just ground says that's not your place, just go back.
Yeah, it's an impactful message indeed.
Yeah.
Olena, as a journalist for Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, you have experienced Russian occupation of Crimea firsthand. What is the general situation for journalists in occupied Crimea right now?
Ви знаєте, я народилася і жила в Криму, працювала журналістом, і я думала, що я буду працювати і жити там все моє життя.
I was born in Crimea, and I thought that I will be working and living there my whole life.
Моє рідне місто Керч, я завжди думала, Боже, як мені пощастило. Це чудове місто, де можна жити і ростити дітей.
My city when I was born is Kerch, and I was always grateful, and I thought that this is the city to live and this is the city to raise children.
Але Росія направила своїх солдат в моє місто, в мій Крим, і вона перевернула життя тисяч людей, які, як і я, думали, що ми проживемо наші маленькі та тихі життя там, на Батьківщині.
Russia expedited thousands of soldiers to this city and to that Crimea, to that province, and that upended our lives, which we thought that we were going to live.
Я працювала журналістом кожного дня, коли Росія захоплювала моє рідне місто. Але потім, коли погрози стали надто реальними і жорстокими, ми вимушені були покинути Крим та переїхати до Києва. Але сотні моїх колег залишилися там, в окупації.
I worked in my native city every day after the occupation, but when the threats became such as I understood that I have to leave, I left, but some of my colleagues and my friends, they stayed there and continued to work.
І найстрашніше, на мою думку, як журналіста, найстрашніше, що Росія робить зараз з людьми в Криму, вона абсолютно ізолює їх, вона намагається лишити їх абсолютно всякої вільної інформації. Це можна назвати експериментом над тисячами людей.
The scariest thing that Russia does in Crimea is that it's trying to isolate people, and it's trying to leave them without any access to free information. This is an experiment which is conducted on people, and it is scary.
Ми, журналісти і експерти, досліджуємо наративи, які Росія просуває для українських громадян, які залишилися в окупованому Криму. І це брехня, це маніпуляції, це абсолютно вивернення фактів. Дуже складно залишатися, ви знаєте, взагалі мислячою людиною, коли ти живеш роками в такому стані, в таких обставинах.
As a researcher, I investigate, I study the narratives which Russia is using to indoctrinate or propagate its own views in the people. And I understood that the way it acts upon people, the way it influences them, may put them in a position when it is quite hard to stay sane.
І саме тому я вважаю, що робота незалежних журналістів в окупованому Криму, в окупації – це героїзм, це мужність, і це дуже-дуже ризиковано, на жаль.
That's why I believe that the work of the independent journalists that are staying in Crimea is the work of heroes, and it deserves our gratefulness and respect. This is a dangerous work.
Я хочу розказати просто на 3 прикладах, що відбувається з журналістами зараз в Криму. В цілому, за даними правозахисників, близько 20 незалежних журналістів Росія утримує в тюрмах в окупованому Криму.
I just want to give 3 examples of what's going on. So there are around 20 independent journalists which are right now being detained in occupied Crimea.
Можна презентацію показати?
Can we start showing the presentation, please?
Це мій колега Владислав Єсипенко. Він працював в окупованому Криму, і він робив репортажі про соціальне життя, про екологію, тобто про питання, які дуже-дуже турбують як кримчан, так і людей, які живуть в вільній Україні.
This is my colleague Vladislav Yatsepenko, who worked in Crimea, reporting on issues like ecology and social issues, which are of importance for the people.
ФСБ Росії схватила його в Сімферополі, його судили за абсолютно фейковим звинуваченням. Вони заявили, що він збирав інформацію для українських спецслужб і що він виготовляв вибухівку.
He was detained in Simferopol on false charges that he was collecting information for Ukrainian secret services and developing explosive devices.
Його судили, йому назначили 5 років позбавлення волі, і зараз він в тюрмі.
He was charged and received the punishment of 5 years in prison.
Наступний слайд, будь ласка.
Next slide.
Це Ірина Данилович. Вона жила в Феодосії, невеликому місті на березі моря. Вона працювала медсестрою і була громадянською журналісткою. Вона багато писала про стан медицини та охорони здоров'я в окупованому Криму.
This is my colleague Irina Danilovich, who lived in a small city by the sea, Theodosia. He worked with the
Медсестра.
as a nurse.
Вона давала коментарі багатьом виданням. Вона розповідала про те, яка погана система охорони здоров'я в Криму, як страждають від цього люди.
She critiqued the healthcare system in Crimea and the way in which people are suffering because of it.
Її арештували. Вона зараз в тюрмі. ФСБ звинуватило її в тому, що вона виготовляла вибухівку з медицинськими голками.
She was arrested on false charges. She is now in jail because she was allegedly developing explosive devices with medical needles.
Їй назначили 7 років тюрми. Її папа помер в Феодосії і не дочекався дочки.
She got 7 years in prison, but her father died without being able to see her again.
І ще один слайд, будь ласка. Це Сервєр Мустафаєв, кримсько-татарський активіст та громадянський журналіст. Його арештували за фейковим звинуваченням в тероризмі і назначили 14 років тюрми.
Mustafayev is a Tatar independent journalist. She was charged with terroristic activities and he received 14 years in prison.
Наступний слайд, будь ласка. Я хочу пояснити, що такі взагалі громадянські журналісти, кримсько-татарські активісти, які зараз існують в Криму. Це дуже важливо.
I would like to clarify who are these people, who are the Crimean Tatar journalists in the occupied Crimea right now.
ФСБ Росії послідовно проводить репресії по відношенню до корінного народу, кримських татар. Вони роблять масові обшуки в селищах, де живуть кримські татари.
FSB consistently is undertaking repressive measures against Crimean Tatars in Crimea, including conducting searches in their houses all the time.
І не завжди журналісти встигали бути на таких жахливих подіях, але кримські татари приходили до будинків, коли приїжджали ФСБ, вони брали в руки телефони, вони фільмували все це і передавали нам, журналістам, в вільну Україну, передавали в різні редакції для того, щоб всі бачили, які репресії проводить Росія в Криму.
The journalists were not always able to make it in time to document these atrocities, but the Crimean Tatars and the Crimean Tatar activists were there. They were coming to the houses, they were recording, documenting, and then they were sharing it with the independent journalists.
І я казала спочатку, що зараз в Криму утримують близько 20 журналістів. Більшість з них саме кримсько-татарські активісти, громадянські журналісти.
I mentioned in the beginning that around 20 independent journalists are right now detained in prisons in Crimea, but I have to say that most of them are Crimean Tatars.
І наступний слайд, будь ласка.
Next slide.
І я хочу сказати, так, я можу багато розповідати про свій особистий досвід, але я зараз тут, а вони там, у тюрмі. І я думаю, що для мене найголовніше розповісти про них, щоб їх імена були почуті тут, у Стокгольмі.
There's a lot I can tell you about my individual experience, but it's more important for me to speak about them, because they are there and I'm here, so as to make their names known and heard.
Yeah, thank you very much. It is shocking and not surprising, unfortunately. It's a repression we all know of, and that goes deep into every layer of ordinary life for innocent people. So culture, art, and also the fight for truth and good journalism are certainly contentious areas. And I turn now to Hanna, Gerdes. You're an expert on international law and human rights. We hear now, I mean, how culture and expressions like art and journalism can be used both as a tool for defiance and resistance, but also as a tool, obviously now, as for abuse. As a human rights expert, how is culture and human rights interconnected from your point of view as a lawyer?
Well, they're very closely interconnected because culture is the baseline for all kinds of freedoms. And just like you said, it's a very powerful tool to use for fighting repression and for protecting human rights, but it's also a very powerful tool by occupational powers and in warfare to use actually for abuse of human rights. It's closely interlinked with almost all basic freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of thought, freedom of movement, assembly, freedom of education. I usually when I try to reflect on this, I try to segregate it in different ways. You can actually use cultures. I will try to do that as well for you, because there's so many different parts of it. First of all, I think it's important to state that the right to culture is a human right in itself. So that's just as a baseline. So this is actually protected by law. I was very happy to hear what your commander said to you, because I think that was a very wise commander, because it is the core of all kinds of protection. It's a way of protesting to visualize, and I think street art, for example, is one of the most, predominant ways. You can see that all over the world, of course. I just came back, a couple of weeks ago from Bogota, and I met a young feminist collective, and I thought about what you said. They are called Derecho a no obedecer, the right not to obey. And they actually use disruption in the public space in different ways to create focus on very grave human rights abuses. So it can be theater when they are actually covering themselves in blood to show all the women that are being killed in female genocide, for example. Culture is also a very effective way of explaining human rights. If anyone has ever visited South Africa, for example, and been to the Apartheid Museum, you will understand that there you can enter 2 doors. I don't know, has anybody been to South Africa, to the Apartheid? You've been. So what happens there is you get like a little note when you enter. And when you come to 2 doors, and then there is a person telling you, turn the note. And when you turn the note, you are by randomly giving a skin color. And so either you go into the door that is made for white people, or you go into the door made for black people. And then during an hour, you actually get to experience how it is to either walk freely, having everything that you're used to in a free society, or being taken away right after right after right after right. And so this is an effective way. Of course, it's an hour you can never explain or understand in the same way, as it's impossible for us. I feel very humbled standing here with you, because living in a free country like Sweden, it's very hard to fully understand how it is to live under occupations. Like you said, you can't even imagine it before you are in such a situation. But I think it is important to try to talk, and this is why I think this panel is so important as well. But I think it's also important to understand that it's not only a freedom. Culture is one of the most powerful ways to abuse human rights. And this has been used in warfare to destroy cultures, to bomb statues, to take away heritage. It's one of the most effective ways. We saw it during Nazism, when you made pavements, walking on dead Jews. You could see it in Daesh in Iraq, you can see it in Syria, you could see it in Libya. But it's been very used by communistic and socialist regimes, and it's been used systematically by Russia. You can see it building Ceausescu's palace, for example. Or me, I'm half Polish, so I have background, and like every time I pass Pałac of Kultury in Warsaw, for me, that's like communism showing its big muscles, right? You see this in Ukraine with the Statue of Motherland, in Kiev. So there is a way of showing power at the same time when people are actually being in war and starving. I think also it's a way of hiding and neglecting human rights. You could see this in Crimea a lot, like when you have occupying powers taking away the right to your language, which books you can read for the children in school, which histories are told, not taking away. And we can see, to be honest, you can see this in a country like Sweden as well. Like, for example, we have very famous people that are minorities, but why don't they have any statues? For example, Katarina Taikon, we were a lot of us fighting for her getting a statue in Stockholm, for example. So I think also it's important to see culture as a way of redress after human rights violations. One day, I hope, when this occupation ends, because it's an important way of processing trauma and injustice as well. And so the work you're doing, it's one way of keeping repression away, but it's also something that will be very important the day the occupation ends, in the sense of getting actually justice and access to justice. Murals, perfect example, Berlin, Eastern Gallery in there. I think also one thing we need to acknowledge, that culture is a way of include, but also to exclude. And I think in Europe that has been very clear. We have the same traumas in Europe, so we speak about that and we use ways to keep culture, common values together. And this is important, But by doing that, it can also keep other cultures away in the sense of closing the borders and closing Europe for others. So this is just different ways of culture. I mean, I'm really passionate about culture and human rights, but it's really, you can use it in very many different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched upon very typical examples and interesting ways of using culture to empower populations and non-violent resistance. I mean, everyone knows has a long and powerful history. Civil rights movements in the U.S. We have all kinds of movements which have used this networked and diverse and sort of flexible tactics in order to actually create change. So I wonder, Olga, what would you say are the main characteristics of Ukrainian non-violent resistance and rights movement right now?
I think that was the most complicated text for the exhibition I ever wrote in my life. That's half of a page, but it took me a couple of months, probably. Because when we started to research when this Ukrainian resistance started, and then you know, just play back, and then, okay, revolution of dignity, then Orange Revolution, then Revolution on a granite, and then back to 60s, and then back to the independence in 1918, and then backwards and backwards and backwards, and it appeared to be the core of Ukrainian state, just to exist despite of, as a resistance in the very core and the root of the whole history of Ukraine. So it wasn't even possible to find a starting point when resistance or non-violent resistance started. And here about non-violent resistance, I think that one of the biggest mistakes when people outside think that, oh, non-violent, it's probably kind of pacifism. No, it's not. It's a warfare. And this is something we need to recognize. And I'm really grateful, Hanna, for you mentioning all those things, that culture can be also a very powerful instrument. And also in our exhibition, probably one of my favorite parts, which gives a lot of hope, it's humor. On my back here is not to laugh, not to cry, I was laughing, right? This is a quote from Lesia Ukrainka. And you know that Ukrainians, the most popular coping mechanism is to laugh it out. all those memes we are collecting. I remember the day I was in Dnipro when Oreshnik happened, and I was like, finally, I can unpack my folder with memes about nuclear and everything like that. This is like, I know we are all a bit young. But this is a very healthy coping mechanism. And when I prepared this section, the first name which came to my mind was Sergei Zakharov, who is from Donetsk, and who was one of the first public artistic figures being persecuted and went to the подвал. I don't even want to translate that. Being really tortured for his artistic response. And what he done, he only created the figures of so-called leaders of LNR-DNR and put them on the street. And he's been really heavily tortured with hunger and all those horrible things just because of that. And then Sergei is now part of the exhibition, and he lives in Kyiv right now, and I asked him, can you just draw something new for the exhibition, like just to link those things? And he was like, nah, I don't believe in it anymore. I was under occupation. I thought that I need to fight somehow to give it a chance, probably. At the day of opening, as you artists always do, he brought steel, like very wet, artist work, which is called the Dove of Peace, which is basically represents a lot how we feel and how Ukrainians feel when being pushed to those so-called peace talks, which is covered with blood, obviously, and dead bodies. And on the opposite side, here is a collection of memes by Maxim Palenko, and one of the deepest and probably maybe one of the favorite ones of mine are the captured. And you know who are there? You think maybe like the Ukrainian prisoners of conscience of Kremlin, which are, by the way, going to play up the numbers, which they're only from Crimea, they're 219, those are registered cases, 133, those are Crimean Tatars. This is only Crimea. We're not even talking about Zaporizhia, Kherson, and other regions. And this is Pushkin, Dostoevsky, even Tsoy. They are the cover of the Russian Empire crimes, and they are captured. They are their tool. Why, for example, so-called Slavic studies all around the world are preoccupied by Russian studies. You can see it even now. There are only few universities. Cambridge is one of those which closed and then opened Ukrainian studies, but Oxford, I'm checking it on a weekly basis. There's only one language you're supposed to know to be on the Slavic studies. And I never even play Ukrainian card on that. I always ask all those former Slavic studies, experts, do you guys know about the brilliant and beautiful Polish literature, modern literature, which is classic? No.
So it's Ukrainian culture despite everything, despite the oppression.
Despite everything. Yeah. And I think that despite of, this is our survival and coping mechanism, unfortunately. But then it shows how that culture can be oppression as well.
As well, yeah, of course, yeah. As an artist, I mean, your work is often saturated with a warm, humoristic approach to life, despite everything. How do you go by finding that humor, despite all the pain, all the destruction in Kharkiv? How do you find inspiration to pick up the pen and pencil, or brush and paint?
I'm a very happy person because I have this superpower to joke, to make a joke when I have very crime situation, very bad situation. My brain creates something very funny, and it was all my life when something shit is happen, and I start laughing and give something very funny. And it was many times ago when I only start make a street art in Kharkiv without permission, so it was illegal, and I was unknown person who just do something on the street. And at all times it was militia, not a police, but it's kind of Soviet system, very old, and this fat, drunk man say, "Where is your permission letter?" No permission letter. Oh boy, you have a huge problem. And I say, fuck, yes, 30 years of prison, yeah. And they start laughing, like, come on. And it's just was talking about corruption, just give us money. And after that, a lot of more serious situation give me a power because I can found something funny words. Because if you're not joking in this situation, you can kill yourself. So I'm happy.
Humor and a slightly anarchistic, perhaps, approach to Soviet communism and that whole system and the oppression that follows from it, perhaps.
It's like answer. It's true Ukrainian answer. And about propaganda, it's like few days here, Stockholm people ask me, what do you think about what Trump say? And I say, come on. Next step will be, it's Russia occupied Ukrainian, it's Europe occupied Ukrainian territory and kills Ukrainian people. It will be a next bullshit.
You never expected that Trump gonna say that that's Ukraine started and occupied itself. And it just
or it was 1.5 years ago, like it was talk about rocket attack, радиаційний, nuclear hitting.
Stations, right?
Ядерний удар по Харкову.
The nuclear air strike
on Kharkiv, and a lot of people believe in this shit and move from Kharkiv, and a lot of people ask me, why you stay in Kharkiv, why you think about it, and I say, if I am not mistaken, we have shooting in Moscow.
I mean, with the nuclear attack, in our museum we have this internal protocol. If nuclear attack happens, Monday is off, Tuesday you are on work back.
Yeah, exactly.
That's Ukrainian humor, I guess, in dire times.
I mean, that's our internal protocol.
Well, I'm thinking, I mean, Gamlet, you have a platform. I mean, in a sense, you're part of a global community. You have an Instagram with 14,000 followers, and you have an outreach. In comparison, I'm thinking of the isolation of Crimean Tatars. How are they, Olena? How are they coping with the situation? What are their tactics in order to keep working to defend themselves and their own dignity, culture and language?
Ви знаєте, важко говорити за когось, бо все, що стосується надії, сподівань, це таке особисте і таке таємниче, особливо під час несвободи. Але я спробую.
It's hard to speak for someone because matters of hope are always personal, and it is especially so in the times of unfreedom.
Звісно, краще було б запитати представника корінного народу кримських татар, але з того, що чула я, що багато розповідали мені, мої колеги, мої друзі кримські татари, Крим – це єдина земля, яка у них є.
It would have been better to ask the native population of Crimean Tatars themselves, but when I'm speaking with them, and the message they're trying to convey is that the Crimea is the only land which they can have.
Немає іншого дому у корінного народу Криму. І не буде.
They have no other home, and they will never be able to get one.
В цьому їх сила, але я впевнена, що в цьому і наша відповідальність. Ми мусимо зробити все, що в наших силах, щоб Крим став вільним, щоб кримські татари перестали відчувати утиски та репресії з боку Росії, щоб люди змогли нарешті дихати спокійно в Криму.
It is that lack of option of choosing home that gives them strength and gives them hope. But it also means that we have responsibility to create such conditions where they will be able to breathe freely again and to feel themselves at home in their home.
Yeah, and also I would say to amplify the voices of Crimean Tatars and to get in touch with their specific experiences, not translated through other people, but from Crimean Tatars themselves, as you say. You, Olena, has also been, you have been studying how, you touched upon it, how the Russian war machine and propaganda machine tries to affect and terrorize the people in Crimea and in Ukraine, of course, in general. How does the meta narratives of proxy media affect people in occupied Ukraine? And how would you say are potent or effective strategies to counter such narratives?
Саме над цим наша редакція працює вже більше 10 років. Проєкт «Крим.Реалії» Українського бюро Радіо Свобода, він створений не для того, знаєте, як багато думають, що ми розповідаємо усім про Крим. Ні, ми в першу чергу розповідаємо кримчанам про те, що відбувається у них в Криму. Але ми робимо це незалежно. Ми говоримо факти і ми спростовуємо маніпуляції. Як добре нам вдається, судячи з того, що нам пишуть з Криму наші читачі, так, вдається. Судячи з того, що нас переслідує російська влада і наших журналістів і забороняють наші публікації в Росії, в Криму, так, думаю, що нам вдається.
That's precisely what we are working with in our editing board, Crimea.Reality, which is a part of Radio Freedom, Radio Svoboda. And the effects of our work can be seen in the fact that what we are doing, we're just giving people facts, and sometimes people think that what we are working with, we're trying to create awareness about what's happening in Crimea for people outside of Crimea, but that's not maybe the most important thing which we are doing. The most important one is that we are trying to inform the people in Crimea of what is actually happening in Crimea because they lack access to information. And how we can see whether we are effective or not in doing this work, well, we are persecuted, and Russia certainly thinks that we pose threat to their goals, therefore we can conclude that it might be effective.
Але я хочу сказати, що жодна редакція не може стати як поліцейським, який може запобігти тому, що робить Росія в Криму, або якось вплинути на ситуацію. Через те, що Росія, вона проводить дуже масштабну роботу по мілітаризації дітей. Вона робить все, щоб діти з малесеньку вже думали так, як хоче російська пропаганда, як вигідно Кремлю.
Now editing board is able to be like a policeman which prevents Russia from indoctrinating people, especially if we consider the fact that Russian schools, Russia in general, as I said, are working with the very young children and with an eye to militarize them, to prepare them to be soldiers effectively.
І крім того, Росія завозить дуже багато громадян Росії саме в Крим, сілить їх в Криму. В цьому немає нічого нового. Радянський Союз робив так само, він просто перемішував цілі народи на території Радянського Союзу. Те саме робить зараз Росія в Криму. Вона заміщує населення.
To this it shall be added that Russia is also using the policy of essentially ethnic replacement, where they bring ethnically Russian population to Crimea so as to settle them there and in that way to change the cultural landscape there.
Так що нам всім є над чим попрацювати ще, повірте.
There remains work to do for all of us.
Yeah, this is a war that is very much against Ukraine culture and identity as much as territory, of course. And you brought up the situation of children, and Hanna, I would like you to just expand a little bit on that. You have said this is also war on children. Obviously, children are deeply affected by the aggressions. But could you, from your point of view, expand on the situation of children and the right to identity and culture?
Yeah. Well, actually, when I was in Warsaw, it was a couple of months ago, I was speaking to a Ukrainian family, and there was a little boy, and he actually said to me, and he spoke Polish already quite good. I mean, Warsaw, Poland, there's been over 6 million, I think, Ukrainians who's come to Warsaw. But to nie jest tylko wojna, to jest ruska wojna przeciwko dzieci, he said. And that means this is not just a war, it's actually a Russian war on children. And this is really clear, because since the beginning of the war, I mean, there's an approximation about 20,000 children at least that have been abducted in different ways. And then Russia has used, of course, various pretexts: evacuation, rehabilitation, re-education. But I mean, what it is, it's like Russification. It's exactly what you spoke about. And this is, we have a partner and civil rights defenders that we work with closely that is called Almenda. And this is an organization, it was, I don't know if you know it in Crimea, but it was created by a young woman when she was only 18 called Maria Solina. And she came here to Stockholm because, well, she got an award for us because of the work she's actually doing. But what she's doing is she's collecting evidence of war crimes specifically aimed at children. And it's been very, very clear that this is a part of something like, it's a doctrine, taking away the children's right to identity, culture, language. You mentioned it also actually using young children and training them to be soldiers for the Russian army. It's really, really a part of a very systematic approach to warfare using children. So I'm just happy you brought that up, because I think this is something, I mean, we do speak about it. I know that this is one of the reasons why the ICC, the International Criminal Court, has filed that Putin should actually be arrested. So that's one of the reasons, because of the war on children. But I think it's a very, when I talked about using culture as a repression, this is a very good example of that, actually. So yeah.
Yes, and it's also, in a way, a strategic way to destroy the future for a whole society, in a way. I know that you have to head off. Am I right? And so perhaps we give Hanna a warm hand.
Thank you so much. Could I just
and allow her to
go.
Leave the
Could I just have
panel?
a photo with everybody here? It would be very nice to have with my colleagues. Yeah. Could I ask you just to take a photo before I leave, so I get with all my... Yes, thank you. Just one quick photo. Thank you.
The panel will continue for 50 more minutes, so don't worry.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So, thank one of everybody of you as well.
Okay. Yes, a lot of people are internally displaced because of the conflict, because of repression and the violence. I read somewhere in the material about your projects, Olga, that in the project in Lviv, there was a method called cultural therapy for internally displaced people in the so-called Razzia project. Is it Razzia project? Yeah, you can find it on the web, of course. And could you develop a little bit? What does it mean? Cultural therapy in relation to internally displaced persons?
Yeah, it just obviously it's expanding a bit the art therapy concept, but with a way more cultural practices people can do. And for example, within the exhibition public program, we had those children workshop led by Aleftina Kahidze, which was really nice and also scary thing. They were fulfilling and drawing their suitcase of their freedom. And I was very bitter to learn that most of them put weapon there. They do understand the weapon goes first in terms of protecting your own freedom. But also it gave them a chance. There were a suitcase of memory, things which just your internal strength. And this, what built internal strength, sometimes were very simple things which are linked with some domestic and home rituals. Like, you know, sometimes it's a cooking borscht. Somewhere, especially from Crimea, I remember that was even before full-scale invasion, when we were discussing with also as Ukrainian Association of Cultural Studies, that was our project, and how to build those links with the Crimean Tatars in Lviv. As Western Ukraine is quite traditional, they're religious, and then here are newcomers, which are mostly Muslims, and it appeared that food is such an icebreaker. When you share food, it means that you do trust each other. And this building trust, on one of the previous panels today, there was mentioned that trust is being considered a main currency of war. And I think that's so. And especially in nowadays when you do not whom to believe anymore. So art appears to be the freedom of sometimes reflection where science or museums doesn't allow you to go so far. And art can do that, right? This is one thing, but also those cultural practices, and for kids, that was a very important thing. And also for women, sometimes we were thinking like, what can it be? And in Russia, what was one of the most popular that women were singing together with Solomia Chubai. They were just coming in and singing and sharing their, like lullabies. And that was something what appeared to be coping mechanism for them to build those little things which are linking them with their homes as well.
Yeah.
And Hanna, before leaving, I know that she was about to talk about women as well, right? But I wanted to tell about another, like the big insight from the whole discovery work on nonviolent resistance that I only learned about Angry Math because I'm wearing their hoodie during preparation of this exhibition. And I think this is also very important identity and Ukrainian thing. I think that's just switching the whole narrative of women in war from being a victim to being a threat. It's not worse, obviously, to mention that our army is mostly the most feminine army in the world right now. That's over 60,000 of women in Ukrainian army forces. But also on the occupation, Angry Mavkas, they used this blind spot of Russians, thinking that young women, they only, like sexual objects, older women, they only can cook and clean, that's it. And they just twisted this narrative on them being able to share the newspapers with the real news, like self-printed at home, which is a very important thing as well, teaching kids at home, teaching them the native mother tongue, right? Then just upbuilding this integrity and also the spirit of resilience.
Yeah, and I mean the war, the whole, since a full-scale invasion at least, has shifted a lot of gender roles. I mean, a lot of women have moved into occupations and work roles that has been traditionally male. So there's also this shift that we can see in many historical examples where women simply are enabled or given space to take a step forward into roles that wasn't for them before, which is ironically perhaps one of the few positive things. Then I guess.
As well as every crisis, I think that this is possibly our main internal strength. Like we are professional survivors, unfortunately, but also now we have something to teach all of you guys because you don't know what's going to happen next. And this is something what kind of became our trademark as a new one. You don't think anymore about Ukraine as Chernobyl, you don't think anymore about only soccer, Andrei Shevchenko, or just boxing guys, but you understand that those are cheerful warriors, those professional survivors who know something about the true freedom values and fight for that.
Right. I'm going back to what Olena said, and you also mentioned that personal objects and the place you call home increases tremendously in importance during occupation, during violence. And I would turn to you, Gamlet. You work in Kharkiv. You almost use Kharkiv as your canvas. How did that idea come up, and how has it transformed by the war? You use ruins or the signs of destruction also as part of that canvas.
Many years I use very ugly places. I found ugly place and coloring in white and do something very minimalistic with text. And now I have new experience when you have destroyed a building or destroyed preach. And it's very sad picture, very sad. And when you make a small writing, small text or small picture, it gives another meaning, and it's not ugly. And a lot of people make a photo because, yeah, Gamlet, yeah, you do this writing, yeah, thank you so much, it's important for us. And of course better if I'm just reconstruct a lot of building in Kharkiv. Of course it will be better, but I'm not a government. I'm not a billionaire, but I'm artist and I can work with what I have. It's like a small, we have a Freedom Street in Kharkiv. It's in the center, it's a small street, and there was little blockade with concrete for make smaller your speed on the car. And I write, when you turn from main street on this small street, Freedom Street, I write there on concrete block, writing Freedom Street, like all of them. And I do it in the summer 2022. It was very short work, like, I don't know, it's like 5 minutes. But I still met soldiers who remind me this work. Like, you know, when we at first time came to Kharkiv at night, and we see in the night this block with this writing. And like, yeah, cool, yes, Freedom Street, like all this city, yeah. And in the future, of course, I met a lot of people before huge invasion. I met a lot of people who came in Kharkiv just for see my works, because a lot of works. So I help to new kind of tourism in a country. It was really funny because when I make works in Chernobyl or Uzhgorod, I make not only after street art, I write Gamlet, Kharkiv. And when people check what's going on, Gamlet, Kharkiv, who is that? They saw a lot of works and understand Kharkiv have something more than just biggest in Europe market, that's all. Not only market. We have something another. And now for me this is culture way in the Kharkiv. It's something amazing because my friends, Kharkiv's people in Europe, ask me, like, you don't have a culture in Kharkiv.
What?
And I say, what? Today was a 3 concert.
Yeah.
And theater, I'm not check what's going on in theater, but I know for sure around 10.
You can't buy tickets for next 4 months. I tried. Each second book in Ukraine is still published in Kharkiv. Who are those guys?
Yeah. So it's interesting for me. This is life, or my lovely place in Kharkiv. It's club, nightclub, not evening club.
Before the curfew.
Some people. This club opened in October 2023 with rave party. You know? Rave party.
It was a long time ago for me, but I remember them. Yeah, I do. Actually.
You know, I love rave so much. I was on a rave party in different countries, but it's new feeling to came on a rave party and understand it can be last your rave party, because you never know where came exactly a rocket. And DJs from which came from different countries, and I know owners of this club, and they write in the letters, the same letter, like, we want to invite you to make a party in Kharkiv. Probably it will be your last concert, and 9 of 10 from 10 answered, no, it's not possible, are you crazy, are you kidding me? And one of them say, interesting experience. Yeah, when I came to Ukraine from Berlin, from Romania, it's interesting. It's very interesting. So it's helped us. And when you see on this rave party a lot of soldiers, and at first you see cars, soldiers' cars, and go inside and see not only young people, but you see soldiers in a form. And I know a lot of soldiers, and I ask them, you came for a party? Yeah, commander, give us one evening. And after night, after this party, we turn back to the zero line. They just came for 3 hours just for a rave party.
Yeah, so art, humor, clubbing and dancing as defiance and resistance and empowerment for people and sort of, I guess, a sense of normalcy, just life, basically, despite everything. So we have to wrap up. Just briefly, I would like to ask, Olena, you live in Sweden. What would you like to see from Sweden more in terms of support for Ukrainians, for occupied Crimea? And yeah.
Ви правда хочете знати?
You really want to know?
Насправді, так, я приїхала сюди з дитиною, коли почалося повномасштабне вторгнення. До цього я була вже в Швеції по роботі, я виступала в Ріксдагі і розповідала про окупований Крим. Але тут я пізнала шведську життя, скажімо так, з ґрунту, з землі.
Yes, I arrived here with my child, but before the full-scale invasion, I frequented Sweden. For example, I gave a presentation, a talk in Riksdag, in the Parliament of Sweden.
І я хочу сказати, що шведські люди, вони прекрасні, вони неймовірні, і деякі люди кажуть, що шведи так трохи закриті і не дуже такі емоційні. Треба їх просто потрусити. Все отак.
Some people say that Swedes are quite reserved and not very emotional, but I think that you just have to shake them quite a bit, and that will change the situation.
В Швеції дуже-дуже багато правил. Я не знаю жодного. Нічого в світі, щоб було так багато правил.
There's a different sense. There are many rules in Sweden, and I don't know any other place which has so many.
І я хочу вам сказати, що я думаю, що напевно це гарні всі правила, якщо вони влаштовують усіх шведів і всі прекрасно жили з тими правилами, поки не прийшли українці.
And I think that apparently everyone was okay with these rules until Ukrainians came.
Тому що, розумієте, ми, українці, ми не вписуємося в жодне правило Швеції. Якщо ти візьмеш, наприклад, школи, то трошки наші діти не вписуються. Візьмеш якісь там програми для безробітних або там по роботі, знову ми не вписуємося.
For example, when you take Ukrainian children to the Swedish schools, they don't quite confirm to what's going on, and the same is going on with arbetsförmedling and programs for searching work and many other institutions.
Ви знаєте, це не добре і не погано. Я розумію, чому це так сталося. Тому що усі правила, які є в Швеції, вони дуже логічні, але вони не враховували українців, які тут знаходяться по директиві. Це і смішно, і грустно, правда.
I believe that many of these rules are very logical and rational, but the people who came here by receiving the European directive are not quite were not quite taken into account when those logical rules were being made, legislated.
Тобто хотілося б, звичайно, щоб моя улюблена шведська бюрократія зробила, ну, хоч щось, якийсь крок назустріч українцям, які тут знаходяться, і дала їм хоча б такі ж самі можливості, як і іншим, хто опинився тут через війну.
So my hope is that my beloved Swedish bureaucracy will be able to grant to Ukrainians the same opportunities which are granted to other people who are ended up here because of the war.
Але повірте, якщо цього не станеться, ми це переживемо. Ми не таке переживали, правда?
But even if this will not come about, we will survive because we have survived something which is more dangerous than that.
Yes, there are certainly things that are more dangerous than Swedish bureaucracy, even though it's massive sometimes. Olga, briefly, what's your next project on non-violent resistance?
Can we have a yellow 30-second video?
Yeah.
We got to that point.
Unseen force, all about resistance of Ukrainians under occupation. Audio and visual testimonies, bold creative works, artistic defense, real acts of resistance, dismantling the Russian evil empire from within. Lviv, Dnipro, Odessa. Come stand with the unbreakable.
So my dream is then DC, London, Stockholm, because I think that the message about Ukraine is not just about territory, it's about people. As you can see, this is definitely not for internal but external audience. So I think that my main idea was, and we can see how the last day, the general state agency being questioned by not inviting you into negotiation about you. So for me, there's no about Ukraine without Ukraine. So our agency, you can speak behalf of us. That's us to be our spokespersons. That's it. Thank you.
I think that was beautiful ending words for this session. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Gamlet. Thank you, Olga. Thank you, Olena. And thank you, interpreter. Thank you for coming.